Hi there, and welcome to Leadership Line of Sight. My name is Taylor, and I'm excited to bring forward here Adam Brown. Now, Adam is the strategic initiative lead at Wyvern. And I think that you might have to give us a little bit of an understanding of this, because when I was looking at it, I've got a kind of a base understanding that imagery from space toward our planet has been lacking. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And welcome, Adam.
Heavy intro. No, pleasure to meet you. Excited to be here. I don't know if you've been watching any of the James Webb Space Telescope type of action unfolding in the world right now, but so the space community has been really on fire lately, seeing all these like beautiful, stunning images, and this telescope it's seeing things that the human eye doesn't. So that's kind of Wyvern's spot. It's doing something very similar. It has this, it's called hyperspectral imaging. It sees like a vast range of colors. And with that, you can see details invisible to the human eye, invisible to other imaging standards. And like it just hasn't really been accessible to commercial markets for a mix of legal reasons in the past, a mix of, technology just wasn't there. So there's kind of like this convergence happening right now, and it's really excited to be a part of the team. It's growing very fast. Just graduated out of Y Combinator. I guess that was in March, I guess. So things are just flying. It's a very fast growing company. It's fun to be a part of a space company based in Alberta. It's, not your everyday kind of job. So it's exciting to be there.
Oh, that's super exciting. Really, when it comes down to looking at imagery, a lot of people don't understand like the depth. Humans are like trichromatic creatures. We get red, we get blue, we get yellow, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that you guys are really making waves. Is that the pun? Making waves with wavelengths?
Wow. Are you going to join our marketing team? Making waves with wavelengths. I actually quite like that. That's exactly it, so it's always interesting because you never know like how in depth your audience member is on like understanding the electromagnetic spectrum and wavelengths of light. But essentially what happens is like we see red, green, blue. Cameras see red, green, blue in a very broad sense. And then our imagery, it like cuts that up into very, very narrow slices of light. And when you do that, you can start to like see the spectral analysis of things. So you can see the chemistry. So you could look at rocks and understand like what type of minerals are there. So that's like a mining example. So very powerful imagery. Absolutely.
Wow. And like when you take a look at the applications for this, what do we do when we get like amazing pictures?
It's kind of, sometimes it reminds me of like a James Bond supervillain. Like you're gonna literally be able to see like the entire Earth. These satellites, they're just going around imaging everywhere, and you get this incredible detail. So you really are. It's like the next generation of imaging. And the fun thing with satellites, like I said, they're everywhere. So there's a few like big applications. If you're looking at agriculture, there's a lot of land. You're looking at mining, looking at oil and gas, forestry, environmental monitoring. So like you're kind of just literally everywhere. So as a startup though, you need to focus in, be who's going to buy this first, who's going to pay us for this imagery. So tons of potential, especially over the long term, but it's like you always got to like narrow that focus to make sure you're getting off the ground.
So that sounds like that's a part of your scope, right? Is as a strategic lead.
Yeah, my job's a little bit of this and that, but definitely helping on like the sales, communication, and marketing. Thinking about where this imaging is going to be used and getting us in front of those people with the right messaging at the right time. And so it's a very exciting journey. I've learned so much, it's just like drinking from a fire hose, and that really is the case. But such an, really unique opportunity just to be immersed in the space world. It's also been really interesting because it's smaller than you think. Like when I joined, I was like, oh, Alberta, satellite company. Like, we're the only ones doing this, right? But then there are other satellite companies. They might not be based in Alberta, but they might have salespeople here, and then so there's people in Calgary. There's, and it's just the world gets smaller really quick as soon as you get into it. And you're just like, oh, okay, start to get the lay of the land. And so just a very interesting ride. And, I've noticed you've had like Kira Blackwell on your show. I noticed you had Pegasus Imagery, like all these kind of like companies related to NASA. And there's just been so many Edmonton and Alberta companies like pitching to NASA. It just kind of like breaks the stereotype, I guess, of, what type of innovations coming from Alberta.
It's funny because like as a province of really high entrepreneurship, a lot of like self-drive and, the Wild West, it's not surprising that when Albertans choose to engage in startup culture, choose to engage in technology, that we do see them competing worldwide. For myself, I'm an investor in ArisMD, and I was on their. I was part of that experience, like with Chandra and Scott, who are both amazing and mutual friends of ours.
I will second that for sure.
So like when you're talking about being sucked into the startup world, I remember watching that show Silicon Valley.
Oh, so good.
Because I was gonna have to live it. It was like a course to me. Yeah. I got flung into startup culture. I literally met friends and they're like, hey, you want to come through this door with me? Like red pill, blue pill moment. And I was like, sure. And suddenly I'm at Apple headquarters. I end up at like South by Southwest. And I'm their pitch man. So I designed the pitch that went to South by Southwest and then later to NASA.
Nice.
So I see what you're saying. Right?
Yeah, I'm loving this backstory too.
Yeah, which is like where somebody's like, hey, you want to go do like an adventure related to space? And you're like, yeah.
Of course. No.
But let's go back through the steps here, because from my understanding, you didn't wake up as a 7-year-old saying like, let's do space imaging. Right?
No, I definitely didn't. 7-year-old, I was like playing hockey or something back then.
Yeah, so interested in hockey, but also like a huge interest in music.
Yeah, I did have quite the musical career there. Let's see, 7-year-old, bit early. I was playing piano back then. Like my dad was in bands. He was a piano player, singer in a lot of like blues and jazz. So I played piano as a pretty young guy, and then you get around 12 years old, and you're like, piano is stupid. I want to play drums. Like I want to be cool. And then so yeah, I started drumming, and I got to be the drummer in like the grade 8 jazz band. That was like the first thing. There's only one drummer, and there's like 3 of us competing to do it. And it is interesting to think, like, if I never got that spot, maybe I wouldn't have had this crazy career. But so I did start drumming like back then. Then my brother, he was a bit older than me, so he was in high school when I was in junior high, and he was in a band. They needed a drummer. I was new to drumming. He's like, come. He's like, Adam, I need a drummer. Like, I don't care what you do, just like make noise. And that's how I started on a pretty heavy metal journey, where I joined a band called Striker. I joined in about 2010. In 2012, we were like opening for Metallica at Rexall Place in Edmonton. We got signed to a record label called Napalm Records, put out some pretty cool videos, toured the world. I did that until about 2019. I retired like right before COVID hit, which is honestly the best timing I think I could have asked for, because that whole industry just slammed like the brakes 2 whole years. It was hard to see, like all my Facebook friends, from a decade of touring the world, like tons of musicians on there, and just like the entire industry hitting the brakes. It was hard to see.
Man, that's crazy, because like when you're talking about retiring from your music career, like you ended up with a Juno and a Canadian Music Award, right?
Lots,
like you kind of put the cherry on top of that. And what's that?
Oh yeah, no, we did have a pretty decorated, we won the Edmonton Music Awards like 5 years in a row. And then we started to feel bad, because it's like no one else was. There's a lot of great Edmonton metal bands, and we kept winning this award, and it was awesome. But it was also like someone else should be like in the spotlight. But yeah, it's interesting. There's a few reasons like why you'd want to retire. I was a drummer, and like physically, my body was getting like pretty destroyed. A lot of touring, like we'd be on the road. Near the end there, it was almost like 6 months out of the year on the road. And just like it's very demanding world out there.
Yeah, and also as a drummer, like we're talking beats per minute. You're not drumming for Ed Sheeran, you know? Like for a metal band, it would have been like a full cardio workout every minute.
Yeah, it's like running a marathon, lots of double kick.
Yeah.
Lots of stick spins, really flashy drummer, crossing the arms, like doing all the cool stuff.
That must have been an amazing experience to do with your brother.
Oh, it is, and so I still live with my brother, and they still jam in the basement here. So it's like, thankfully, it's like the world didn't completely disappear for me because I still got to see the guys all the time. I was still really close with them. And that doesn't always happen. So it was actually like a nice transition for me for sure. And, I'm really proud of them. It's like actually, what day is it? Tomorrow, Saturday, they're playing Wacken, which is like the world's biggest heavy metal festival in Germany. Wow. So it's kind of like a huge like milestone for the band, and they're doing that tomorrow. So they're still growing. They're still got, momentum, and that's really fun to see.
That's awesome. And how has your life changed since then? So you were kind of closing that chapter, and what else was going on for you?
So at that time, when I retired from the band, I essentially got promoted to CEO at this startup called Nanolog Audio. And so I was previously like the VP of sales marketing. And then I was like, hey, I want to focus on this because I got into the startup world, and I saw so much potential. I was so excited. I was also kind of balancing the band and the startup, and then when the band went away, they're like, "Oh, do you want to be the CEO?" And I was like, "Well, that sounds awesome, right?" So we were small, but just learned so much in that world. It was quantum electronics, so that's where I ended up pitching to like NASA and Sony and Samsung, and going to Korea and Japan and Vegas and CES, the whole works. And then once you're immersed in that world, it's just like, it's addictive. You just want to be in it more, and you just want to grow, and you want to take over the world.
So what you're saying is that if you don't think you have the talent to make it in music, startups has a lot, like there's some similarities there. Yeah. You were on tour, right?
Yeah. It's funny because when I quit the band, I was like, oh, I'm not going to tour as much. Like, I'm not going to travel. And then I ended up traveling like twice as much as the CEO. I was doing all these pitches across, North America, and I was going to like Nanotech Japan, trying to meet, Sony. So it changed, but you're not lugging all the drums with you. So it was much more enjoyable travel.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's also weird to come home from experiences like that.
Yes.
So I remember coming home and giving my wife a gift that was a gift to me, actually. Scott bought me a set of Beats for my wife because I had mentioned I liked them, but we were at Apple headquarters.
Yeah.
Right. And so like I get home and I'm like, yeah, honey, I got you this gift. She's like, oh, that's great. Like I picked it up at the airport, Yeah. And I'm like, no, these are like from the mothership. Like I went to the place.
From the mothership. I love that.
Yeah, Apple Park is a pretty incredible place.
I haven't been yet, and I will get there, right? It's just when, right?
Yeah, so you had come through this role as a CEO. You're traveling like crazy. Mm-hmm. How did that kind of shift to where you are now?
Yeah, well, I mean, so doing all that traveling, lots of excitement. We were like trying to build up to the seed round, and then COVID hit on like March, 2020. Spent our world. Then suddenly, like everyone was like, Adam, you went from being an exciting chance to be like a really risky startup. Like when the financial crash, and it was true, you know, like we were hardware, electronics, really hard to get investment in, like anywhere. Alberta, almost impossible, right? Um,
Well, let's
so
talk about that for a second. Alberta, when we talk about like getting money from places,
mhm,
they don't ask the same questions here that investors from like California ask.
it's a
Investors from California are like, how many multiples are we going to get at the end?
yeah,
And investors in Alberta are like, okay, how many months from now am I going to get my first paycheck?
it's a different mindset, you
Totally.
know, different risk tolerance, different kind of like leaps of faith, I guess. And it was really interesting, like being down in Silicon Valley and um, just trying, and even in Korea, I was in Korea for 3.5 months, trying to like understand how it works there. And there's like a lot of kind of like national funds get poured into investor pots. So even though it's the investor you're talking to, it's still like largely driven by the government in a lot of ways. So just like learning, like it's not just Canada, but there's different kind of, you know, funding habits, I guess, around the world. And so you learn a lot. And of course, you know, Silicon Valley is like the really exciting one that everyone loves. Um, but yeah, hardware, hard, electronics, hard, semiconductors, hard. Learned a lot of lessons, you know. And it was when I was in Korea, one of my friends, he had a software startup. He's like, Adam, just do a software startup. Like you'll crush it. You know, he's like, it's so easy. You'll nail it out of the park if you do it. Still haven't done that journey yet.
So where did this end up at Wyvern?
Well, yeah. So at Nanolog, at the end, we were building sensors. And so they were photo sensors. They were tailorable to certain wavelengths of light. And we were really focused in the ultraviolet. So we were like getting over 100% quantum efficiency, which is like theoretically impossible, but it's the quantum realm, you know, that's what we're dealing with. So we had some really exciting results. These sensors, they perform great in cold temperatures. And then I knew Wyvern because I'd seen them at a pitch competition or two. We were in the same like venture mentoring service at the U of A. So I'd kind of known about them. And then so I connected with Chris and I was like, Chris, I want to put my sensor on your satellite. You know, like let's go to space together. Because they're doing hyperspectral, which is, you know, you're looking at tailorable wavelengths, essentially. You're looking at like really sharp segments, which is similar to what we were building. And so that's where I kind of like got it, I guess, my first real understanding of like Wyvern's product and where they are heading. And then I knew some of the other team as well on the sales side. So it just seemed like a natural fit afterwards. And, you know, I wanted to work for SpaceX, but you have to be American essentially. So, yeah, the doors were closed. And then suddenly there's like this, I just saw it on LinkedIn one day. I was just like perusing the world. They were hiring a marketing person. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I just put my name in to see what happened. And then ta-da, you know, like 9 months later, I guess.
Wow. That's pretty cool. It's interesting to see how you see adventure, right? Like you're not shopping for an accounting job.
No.
You know?
Yeah, I guess I've always striven to be like outside of the box, pushing the norms, doing things that, you know, a lot of people perhaps uh, wouldn't do themselves. So, but now I've almost like set this precedent in my life, and it's hard. It's like, what am I gonna do next? You know, I'm always pushing the boundaries. Um, and I don't know why that is. And I've been trying to like understand. And I think I just have a bit of like ADHD at sometimes. Like, oh, like there's like so many things I want to do. And then something pops up and I just get like super focused on it though.
Yes.
That's like kind of where I am right now in the space world.
Yep. I resemble that remark. Honestly, most people look at what I do and they're like, why? You know, like it looks really painful. This looks like the people that crawl to the finish line at the end of marathons, right?
Yeah.
And running a couple of companies, it's not an easy choice.
No.
And working with people that are trying to achieve neat things and achieve growth themselves,
Mhm.
it's not always the easy way to go. But I find that to look at some of the other things that you could consider, it's almost like putting on like doing something you've done before, or
Mm.
imagine like when you were too small for a playground and it was like this big accomplishment, and then you grew to play tag on that playground, and then you come back when you're like 16 and like it's hard to care at all, you know?
You just described how I feel about being in a band,
Mm.
roughly. It's I use it's like a video game I already beat. Like I don't know. It's like I've been there. I did it. I put a lot of time and effort into it. Really excited to where I got. Um, but then you
When you're
look
talking
back.
about time and effort, though, this is something that I want to decode, because there's a whole bunch of people that would love to play the video game that you won, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, at what point did you do like up, up, down, down, left, right, left, right? Like, was there, see what I mean? Like, what was it? What do you feel as though meant that you shared a stage with Metallica,
Mhm.
and there's so many people that want to do that?
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about leadership, and it's a pretty loaded question for me because, like, if we use the Metallica example, it's like we together as a team really wanted to go high places, and it's very hard to get a band generally where everyone's on that same wavelength of like, someone's getting married, the other guy wants to do a weekend. It's very rare you get like five people like gung ho. So we were kind of like on a mission together, right? And then we also had a lot of complementary skill sets. So it's like I was coming from a marketing world. We had a great singer. He could do recording. So it's like we had some of the tools also to like create a presence, to grow as an organization in these ways. So it's like, and then there's the luck and the opportunity, and then there's the network and who and all that type of stuff. So really
So I
hard to
think that
dial
people
it
get
in.
obsessed with that part, with the part that's outside their control, the
Yeah.
luck in the right place at the right time, and
Mhm.
that weird conversation at like a buffet line turning into this big shot later, right?
Yeah.
Like those are
I'm
the things that people focus on, but they don't focus on putting five people together that are just going to be like, okay, to the moon or bust, right?
yeah, which is it's an exciting attitude to be in that world, but it's really hard to keep it going. To the moon or bust. I like that. Is that Wyvern's new statement too?
Okay, where do I
uh,
apply? This is so fun. We should just keep going. No.
yeah. Um, yeah. So just thinking of that world, like, yeah, the time and effort, but you also have it's sorry, I'm getting a little mixed up here, but it's like thinking of like we did a lot of grants. So like that was a lot of my world was like crushing these grant applications. And I like them because they do represent the world a bit. Like you need a good plan to get them, but you also need a good product. It's like you need good material, you need a good song, you need a good video. Like you're not going to get funding if you don't have a good product. And then you're also not going to get funding if you don't tell the right people and if you don't tell them the right way. So I mean, like that goes to startup culture, goes to any business, right? So it comes down to like, do you have the goods? Like that's like table stakes. It's like, can you even compete? And then it's everything else. And that's like the hard stuff, it's like the network, communications, commercialization, like that. That's like the heavy lifting. But some people think that they can just have a product and that's good enough. And I think that's probably like huge mistake, especially in startup world. It's like a lot of people end up with solutions, not thinking of like the problem, the bigger picture. And it's like, we have this amazing technology, but it's like, okay, who's going to use it and why? Where are you going to get money? Like all these questions.
So I think that that's like where they say that necessity is the mother of invention. Like
Mm.
there's so many companies that buy solutions to a problem they don't have, right?
Yeah,
It's like
it does
shopping
happen.
without a list. If you're hungry, you're going to end up with way more Pop Tarts than normal, right?
Yeah. That's good. You're making me hungry, like right now. Pause. No, no.
Yeah, it's weird how like when I remember going to Augmented World Expo and seeing all the different expressions, because like there's some brilliant people out there,
Yeah.
but sometimes brilliance manifests itself in something that's like exceptional but complicated,
Mhm.
or like it's 17 problems deep, and like nobody's ever going to get to like level 17 unless you get the rest of the challenges out of the way.
Yeah. Yeah, like it's an interesting world. I'm not saying like anything's impossible, right? Like when you have those incredible solutions, but uh it's just I do see like the music world and the startup world. There are a lot of similarities between people being like, "Oh, I got a great song." And it's like, "Oh, I got a great product," you know? But it's like you haven't figured out the full picture here. And then so I do a lot of like guest speaking at well some of the universities in Edmonton. It's like the U of A and McEwen and Concordia, and it's just like that's often a message I try and get across, especially to the music students I'll talk to. I'm like, having a good song, having a good album, this is not good enough. But this is just getting you your foot in the door. Like literally, if you don't have this, you're going nowhere.
Yeah, you think you're at the finish line.
Yeah,
You just entered in the race, right? You
yeah.
haven't even seen your competition yet.
Yeah, and this is interesting. The story, like when Stryker first signed to our first record label, just an interesting learning experience. We thought we kind of made it. You know, we were pretty young. We were like I was 22, I think, at the time. Worked really hard, got this record label, pretty prominent label, especially in the metal world. Uh, and then we kind of like took the brakes off because we thought they were going to do all the work. You
Hmm.
know, we thought they were going to do the planning. We thought they were going to do all the execution on everything. But then in reality, it's like that's when we needed to start pushing twice as hard. So
Hmm.
we learned. It took us like 9 months to learn that lesson, and that really sucked because like we were waiting on them to book this tour and book this tour, and then it never happened. And 9 months went by, and like we had nothing, and then so we had all this momentum going into the signing, and we just released this album, and then like nothing happened. So it's really you got to like take control of your destiny, I guess. Moral of the story there, but just some learning curves along the way. Um,
Well, it's weird to think about that because normally when you're doing much more conventional things, you have so many examples,
mm, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And like, how many bands did you know that you were sharing your experience with that
Mhm.
had just got a record label and were going through or could have given you advice or shown you the way?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Like this was also, I feel like the internet is so much better now than it was 10 years. Like you can Google anything now. Like, anything's possible. A lot like Reddit forums, whatever it is, like there's just so many ways to get information. And I'm not saying it didn't exist previously, but and the music industry is a little weird because a lot of people like they want to succeed, so they might not share some key insights because they want to do well. So I found that it's just kind of like the weirdness of the industry there a bit. So I'm not saying everyone's like that, but it's like you
That's
are
something I
competing.
see being directly different
Mm,
in startup culture.
yeah,
The
definitely.
one, startup culture is incredibly collaborative.
Hmm.
And also, like when you go into some of those environments, like I remember meeting the team from Eye Candy out of Germany, and they're doing multi-screen entertainment. So you would like watch television and interact on your device at the same time for like huge shows, like not just like Much Music, Call to Vote on the Song. Remember that?
Yeah,
Because that's what you're talking about when you're coming up through these. Like it was much more rudimentary, and the
hmm,
gatekeepers were giants compared to who they are now.
yeah. No, you nailed it on the collaboration in the startup world. And so like when I got into the startup world, it was so welcoming. Everyone was like so supportive, and we're all like even in Edmonton, which is a relatively small community, but like I don't know if you've been to Startup TNT, if you've been to that. Oh, so it's just like a whole bunch of entrepreneurs getting together every Thursday night to drink beer. And
I
it's
did
amazing.
startups backwards. I like started at finals in South by Southwest,
Okay.
and I've been working my way back.
That's pretty dope. That's pretty cool actually. But it was just like when I started going and getting like immersed in the culture, it was like that's why it's so addictive, you know. It's like you meet really incredible people, really smart people, really driven people, and it's fun to be in that world. And everyone's trying to tackle like such big issues, you
Yeah.
know. And so that was a problem for me at the end of my career. I was like, you know, being a drummer's pretty sick, but like at the end of the day, I'm mostly entertaining drunk people at a bar, like or a venue. And then so you think about the bigger picture of like what are you going to achieve in life and where you go and all this stuff. Like honestly,
That's a
hit me
hard
pretty.
lesson, right?
Yeah,
Because you probably dreamed to that level, and
yeah,
then you got there.
yeah. Well, somewhat. Like you know, there's still plenty of room to grow in the music career, but it's just realizing that you know, even if we made it to the next level, it's still like, would I be happy? And I didn't think I would be anymore. So that's kind of like when I started to make the transition. But I mean, that's what I've loved seeing in the startup world. It's just like tackling huge problems, and, you know, being ambitious about it and assembling the team. And it's like so exhilarating.
Oh, it is. It
Yeah.
really like reminds me of like, there was a few people sitting around in Europe that says this sucks so bad, right? They would have been in like the 1800s. This sucks so bad that I'd be willing to die at sea or go to nowhere and figure it out, right? And that's like what startup culture feels like to me. Is they're
Yeah.
like, listen, this world is so broken
Yeah.
that we are going to do things that most people would be like, that's so crazy, right? Like, why would you take so much risk to solve
Mhm.
something that's not about you?
Yeah.
And they do.
That is such an interesting analogy. I'm curious, like, if Elon was like, "Hey, Taylor, you want to go to Mars? Would you go? Like, would you get on that ship?"
No, I'm not going to Mars.
No, you're not.
No, like when like if he was like, you could be in Mars right now,
Yeah.
right? But like for me, I also know what kind of helper I am.
Okay.
I need people, right?
Mm,
Like I do the best in environments where people are interacting with others through computers. Like
yeah.
that's my I'm big into things like developing experiences. That's who I am as like a marketer.
Hmm.
And and so if he was like, let's go to Mars, I was like, you must have chose the wrong Taylor. You need people with like, I can't fix anything.
That's interesting. It's just,
But if he told me something like Scott and Chandra were like, hey, one of the most major killers in any first world nation is medical error. You want to come fix that?
mm,
I was like, yeah,
yep. I'm with
like
you.
this is like immediately my time and money.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Well, it's nice to learn a bit about you too.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that I see in you as well. Like, there's something out there that you're like, there's a bigger picture here,
Hmm.
and you're approaching that from a few different angles, right? You must have learned so much in your last experience in startups, and now you're looking at this experience. And what I was hearing from your story is your understanding of target market fit.
Mm, trying. Yeah, yeah. It's hard to nail it, you know, but I think it's just like so key. And I think it's easily missed. And yeah, that's also probably like the biggest learning from Nanolog, you know, is just like when you don't have it, you're not going far either. Like we pushed and we pushed, but at the end of the day, like we had these super custom, really high tech electronics for like a really small, narrow, low cost market. Like it made no sense, you know, like no wonder it didn't take off. And then so after I kind of like analyzed that and made, you know, that realization and forecasted the sales and the costs and being like, look, like this is not going to work, you know, like the market is not going to accept this. but the technology is amazing, you know? So it's like, let's try and see what else we could do with this tech. And then we pushed, and that's how we ended up sensors. Is like, oh, this is like a hot market. It's growing. They need ultraviolet sensors. We have ultraviolet, you know. So like, we started lining up a lot of the ducks, but couldn't make it work in the end. Ran out of runway.
Yeah, time gets us all.
Yeah, you know, and so it's just interesting. So they say you learn more from your failures, right? And I think that's absolutely true. So I've learned a lot. And it's just, you know, it's always like, if you could go back and do it again from day one, what would you, it's like, could you make it? And maybe, you know, like with everything you know now, if you went back to your last project, could you make it work? It's like, maybe.
Yeah, so like in that, it's always a maybe, because this stuff can be vapor anyway. Like there's so many people that are chasing these prizes, and some of them have like incredible funding, but they just don't have the talent. And other people are incredibly talented, but don't have the funding. And really, like, to help people understand what it's like, once you have a good idea, you go around the world and shop it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then you'll go to some places where it's almost like a showdown. Right.
Definitely.
Like, we're in augmented reality for surgery. Like, everybody wants that, you know?
Yeah.
And so when you go to places like Cleveland Clinic or MIT, and like you're in front of some of the people that are probably some of the scariest minds for competition out there.
Yeah.
And they're still collaborative. And when they see something that is incredible, they call it out. And they're like, yeah, that thing's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had probably quite a few of those moments with this business where people were urging you to continue, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And everyone's like, where's the tech? You know, I was like, what are you doing with the tech? I remember like that when I pitched to NASA, did the iTech challenge in Vegas. It was like, it had to be there really early in the morning. We were exhibiting at CES. It's exhausting, right? And then we have this whole pitch with NASA. And I think we had to get there at like 7 a.m. Sit down, and then like the chief technologists from all these different ones come and sit down. Like, okay, let's hear your pitches. I was like, oh my God, like, no pressure. But then like seeing all
was that more pressure to perform than music? Like in big venues?
Oh yeah. I think so. Well, it's similar. Like, I don't know. After you play like 500 shows, it's pretty automatic, you know?
Okay.
Like, I literally could get on a stage like right now, and it'd probably be fine. But with the NASA one, you know, especially for like the final pitch, they like, you got to shape up your pitch, and so you're working on all these improvements to it, and you're trying to remember it. So it's a little different. I'd be like learning a new song right before going to play, which would be stressful. But I just remember like seeing all these, like the other companies were astounding. Like their tech was wild, and I was like, oh my God, there's such impressive people in the room. And then, you know, I've told that to some other people, and then they're like, yeah, but they're probably looking around the room thinking the same thing, you know, like. So it's an interesting world, but yeah, that was one of my favorite moments in my whole life. But like, I've had pitching to NASA and opening for Metallica. Like, those are kind of the two that I like. Like, those are sick moments.
Yeah,
like, really exciting. Yeah.
And obviously to have those milestones now, and then to be stuck with that playground problem.
Yeah.
What's next?
Yeah. Well, like Wyvern is just like impressed me so much. Like the founding team, like I'm not a co-founder there or anything, but like they have just been crushing it. Like the growth, the funding, the success. Like I am just like really impressed. So I can definitely see like them making some waves with wavelengths. So you know, who knows where that ride goes, but I certainly see this company like succeeding with or without me. Like the ship is sailing on a really exciting journey, you know, and we're going fast. So we have like 8 open roles if anyone wants to work for a satellite company in Edmonton, Alberta. Go
Well,
check out
that's
the
something that we're
website.
seeing a lot of with the amount of people moving to Alberta right now and the conversations about tech. Like a lot of people don't know this, and we're actually going to have her on the show coming up, Laura Kilcrease.
Ooh,
So
lovely.
she is one of the people that like behind South by Southwest.
Mm,
And I have no idea. Like this is possibly the best government hire I've ever heard of, is the fact that she's working for Alberta Innovation. You know,
yeah,
like that's incredible. That's like your minor hockey league picking up McDavid for the weekend tournament.
that's a that's wow. I hope she gets to hear that analogy.
Man, she's such a delightful person. But seeing how that is changing, like a
Hmm.
lot of people don't understand that this place that we're in right now has a really young population that can basically apply to anything. And that you and I are part of the sample here, meaning like two people that do entrepreneurship and startups at like levels where they come in contact with NASA, right? Like
Absolutely.
I
Yeah,
think a lot of people would think Edmonton, Alberta, and be like, yeah, that stuff doesn't happen there,
I
right?
know. That
Like I
was
know the guy behind the Apple on-screen keyboard, you
is
know,
that
that guy came from here.
uh I know, and it is exciting, and I don't think enough people know. So I actually was, foolish enough to run for office in the last federal campaign, and a big driver for me was just like the innovation here could explode. Like this is such an exciting time, and we do have a young, talented population. We have a great university. We have, Calgary also has a great university, and they're booming too. Their tech sector in Calgary's like really on fire. Um, so it just makes me want to push even harder in Edmonton. So, but the competition can be good, right? But that was like a big thing for me. It's just like there's so much potential here, and how do we really reach it? Like what are the steps we need to take? Um,
So what do you think has to change? Right? Like, so in order for Edmonton to actually be known as a startup haven, what do you think would be like maybe one or two big impact moves?
well, I mean, like what startups need are customers, and we have these massive players in our own backyard, like mining, like oil and gas, like we have massive kind of like companies here, and if we could be doing more pilots, if we could be encouraging like that type of like collaboration, getting early results, like that's what really would move the needle, I think, for startups. Like funding is good, customers are way better. Um, you know?
Like giving a fish versus teaching to fish, right?
Yeah, he's like, yeah, the grant opportunities here, they're pretty good. The pretty good grant landscape in Alberta for tech. Depends, what your focus is, but
I might have an unpopular opinion there.
okay.
I think that the grant structure here gets startups addicted to government money and then they die on it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was the whole difference between like the Canadian versus the American mindset. It's like your Canadian startup, you go get some grant funding to get off the ground. Your American startup, you go get $1 million of capital and you execute. And you can be, nimble when you're not tied to grants, because then you don't need to like follow this reporting. You don't need to hit these milestones. Like, so it is a very different culture.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
but I think a lot of the wealth here is conventional wealth. They made companies built over time, they built wealth, and they're like, that's how money happens.
Mm,
Whereas they haven't met anybody like Mike Maples Jr. that was like the first investor into Twitter and like 87x'd his money. They would have made that company that took 30 years to develop that revenue in
mhm,
in two,
yeah.
right? And that's because they're trying to build ships, not rocket ships.
Hmm.
And they got to understand that startups is rocket ships.
Yeah. And I've enjoyed like going back to Startup TNT. Like they're a pretty cool organization. It is at the lower level, but what they've been doing is like they've been bringing in new investors into the startup ecosystem for early investment, because like investors here, they don't often know, like they came from oil and gas. They're very traditional. Like they know nothing about quantum electronics. They know nothing about augmented reality for, healthcare solutions. They
And
don't
I
like,
don't feel like they do need to know.
uh,
What they need to do is sit down with groups of entrepreneurs like NASA does, right?
yeah.
And say like, hey, I'm going to listen to 100 of these groups and I'm going to bet on 10 racehorses, and the one that wins is going to overcome my losses. That's like what game day startup investors look like.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm with you. So like I do see us moving in the right direction, but I think like being tied to the government grant for an early stage startup like is not going to change anytime soon in Alberta. Like I would be so happy if I was proven wrong there, but like and it's tough because like even if you look at Wyvern, like all of the big money that's been raised, like it's not Canadian money. I don't think it's almost all from the United States, right? So it's like, how do we get that type of like Series A funding? And so it's a mix because it depends which entrepreneurs you talk to. If they're early stage, they're like, we want more early stage capital. And if they've already like kind of grown a bit, they're like, we need the Series A capital. And the government's like, we want Series D, like we want,
we're only in on sure things, actually.
yeah, we want 100%
startup.
certain bet.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how we grow. I think over the next year, I think the attitude and cultures like started to shift. But I am new. Like I've only been here for 3 years, so I don't know what it was like 10 years ago. I don't know what it was like 20 years ago. Where like Silicon Valley has like a really long history of this kind of like startup innovation. So I think we're on a really exciting trajectory, and you see all these companies pitching to NASA. You see, more and more graduating from Y Combinator, hitting the Series A. We're starting to get some pretty big hitters out of Calgary, and it's like Neo Financial, like these types of companies. Like we are seeing this type of growth in Alberta. So on the right way, what more can we do? Maybe need to workshop it with some brilliant minds.
And when you take a look at like what your schedule looks like in your current role, are you still making like is travel still a big part of your experience?
Oof. I just now that the world was back to normal, trade shows. So I've been doing a lot of trade shows. It took me 18 hours to get home door to door from St. Louis to Edmonton.
Yeah, I did 21 from Montreal last month.
21 from Montreal.
Yeah, not even customs.
Oh, that hurts my soul.
Yeah, I felt grateful when I got home. I heard there was people that got canceled in the air. Like we were supposed to get you to Edmonton. We're landing in Winnipeg. Your flight's over.
Oh no, canceled in the air. That's next level, man.
I'd never even heard of it before that news article.
Yeah, I'd be, yeah. And it's just
That's
like
gotta be really hard. What was St. Louis like?
Well, the trade show itself, it was an agriculture convention called InfoAg. St. Louis, interesting spot. Like I think their downtown's been hit pretty hard. So it's still a little like weird on the streets there, and the travel was absolutely brutal, and the tickets are expensive. It's like I'm spending like over $2,000 for this like absolutely painful experience.
Jeez, sir, may I have another?
I'm planning my honeymoon with my fiance, and I'm like, no connecting flights. That's my goal. Like, I just want a direct flight anywhere. I don't care where it is, but if I spend 2 days in an airport for my honeymoon, like it's just gonna ruin the entire vibe, right?
Oh my God. It would be so brutal, right?
I know.
The whole essence of that lost.
Yeah. And it's like you're paying all that money, and it's just like, it just hurts the soul, a bit. So it'd be interesting to see how that, but like the team, like there's a lot of travel going on. We got I don't know, dozens of events in the next few months. So like people are hitting the road, and it's just a tough time. So I think if you go out there with the expectation knowing that it's going to be a bit of a tough ride, that might be nice to ground you in your expectations.
Yeah, I think so as well. Now, before we wrap up the show, we hit answerthepublic.com and use some keywords around what Wyvern does and also some elements to see what the internet wants to know. Now, keep in mind that you could pass on any one of these questions. They're literally trending questions that are typed into Google related to your space.
Very
So
cool.
let's cue these up and see what you like here. So the first one is, what's satellite imagery used for?
Okay, I can give a few examples. So if you looked at agriculture, for example, our imagery can like tell you when a crop is stressed, and often at an early stage before like the human eye could see it. So the big problem there is like fertilizer cost or exponent, like they're through the roof right now. It's really big pain point for farmers. Fertilizer also has a lot of like GHG emissions tied to it. So if you can reduce the use of fertilizers, you're increasing the farmer's ROI and you're decreasing the pollution. So it's kind of like this big win-win. So if you can like essentially make a heat map of the farmland and you say like, look, these are the precision areas, like these are the targeted areas where we need to apply fertilizer. You don't need to do the full field. Same thing if it has like an infestation, like you don't need to put herbicides over the entire field. You just do the targeted area. So if you can do that at an earlier stage, you're saving money, reducing the impacts to the environment. Like another big one would be like methane monitoring. It's a really hot topic in oil and gas. It's a very potent kind of GHG emission and is also a valuable product. So once again, if you can reduce leaks of methane, these companies that get more product, higher ROI, but they're also polluting less, which is like a huge ESG and rightfully so, like global mission to kind of reduce those impacts. So those are kind of like two key ones that come to mind.
And those are awesome examples because I don't think that anyone would think space imagery, methane emission, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we figure out if there's a gas leak? You know what? We should take a look from space.
Isn't it cool? Yeah, it's super cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And here's the next question. How does hyperspectral imaging work?
Well, essentially it sees a very broad range of colors. So like we said, red, green, blue, that's visible from about like 400 to 700 nanometers in the electromagnetic spectrum. So this is a pretty technical way about it. So it's like, that's your camera seeing the visible wavelengths. And then, so those have like pretty big chunks. So it's like blue, green, red, like they kind of overlap. They're huge. Hyperspectral, it does like these really, really narrow slits. Boom, 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 boom. And it'll have like 30 to 100 kind of wavelengths in that same area. So that's what it does. It sees like a very dynamic range of colors. And then you start to detect like insights invisible to the human eye. And it goes beyond visible wavelength in the short wave infrared, the red edge area. So a bit of a technical answer on how it works, but it's like, I always struggle with that as a marketer. It's a very technical product, it's like, it's a very advanced thing, hyperspectral imaging. And so
a lot of people don't understand that, like when we see a rainbow, I think we see like 7, maybe 12 colors.
Yeah.
Right? When a butterfly sees a rainbow, it actually has the highest amount of chromatic vision of any land animal. So it's going to see it like 3 times as thick. There's a whole bunch of colors that you don't even get. And if you really want to nerd out, you can go and find a mantis shrimp. They have the largest color spectrum of any living animal. And then you would essentially
this.
I'm a nerd. I love things. Amazing. I love animals too. But like when you see that much data, like could you imagine that there were things that were blocking you because they just weren't in your vision availability?
Oh yeah, it is wild. And it's interesting to use the rainbow analogy because some of the tech team was using it as an example too. Like the light there is always there. Like, the rainbow, you're seeing all these colors just because of certain reflections, but like the light is always there. And then so hyperspectral is kind of doing that at all times for everything, everywhere, which is like a very powerful kind of concept.
Yeah. And that's something that like the amount of information that we can get out of it is so incredible. The I noticed that you have a PMP certification. Can you explain what that is?
Project management designation, professional. So yeah, that's what it is.
Why do you think so why is a PMP certification important?
Oh man. Well, it's funny because I've been managing projects for so long, going back to the band and being a CEO, like whether it was a music video or a product release, like all these things are projects, right? And then so taking some formal kind of like certificate on it, like the training, I really liked it. Like it was really great content. It was just, and it's funny because I think project management, like kind of like sales, like sneaks its way into every aspect of life in some respect. Like, so if you want to get things done, uh, it's just like a really nice framework for making sure that things are being done on time. You're building the right things for the right people. You're staying within cost. You're making sure you got your right resources. All this type of like, it seems elementary when you look at it, but when you apply it in practice, I think it's really valuable.
I agree. I find so many little like structures like that, especially as an entrepreneur. I constantly feel like I'm picking up like parts and taking them back to like stick them in my machine, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I got another one here. How do satellites affect the environment?
Um, Interesting. How do they affect the environment? Well, I would say like there's a lot of opportunity to improve the environment on a massive scale. So like when you think about Wyvern, like a lot of the mission and vision for like the founders is like to have a snapshot of the health of the entire earth. Like that's like over time when we have enough satellites up, you will literally have this really in-depth picture about the health of the planet. Like you'll be looking at the vegetation health, like literally everywhere, the ocean, like it's so there's tons of it. You're looking at methane emissions, right? So I think there's a lot of like really positive potential there. And then I'm not saying there's zero negative impacts. Like you're launching things into space, takes a lot of emissions to get there. And that's honestly something I haven't like dialed myself into fully is like understanding because we're a small sat. Like, it's like as big as a lunchbox and they do like ride shares. It's almost Uber for space, right? So how do you quantify like you took up this much room on this rocket ship that equals this emissions over time? If we cancel out, how many gigatons of methane, where's the break even analysis on, how much emissions did it take to get to space and make the satellite versus how much, we're going to reduce. But I am quite positive, overwhelmingly positive that this other half will greatly outweigh the kind of like getting there.
Yeah, because how could you ever manage anything if you couldn't measure it?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Like, and so for the methane emissions, that's been a huge problem. Like it's invisible. So is it hard to find, and so people don't always know it's a problem. Like that's a lot of the successful stories has been like, look, people didn't even know they had these massive leaks. And then, they fixed it in 2 days or something. And then they say the ROI on that paid for itself within like 5 days for the whole project, five
Wow.
days. And then you're making money on fixing this leak, right? So I think there's massive potential to improve the environment through satellites.
That's incredible. And I like that you've dedicated yourself to that as a mission because,
Yeah.
like, honestly, right now, the more we can see, the more we can change.
Mm-hmm.
And you had some great examples about how we can be more specific with our change, right? Like,
Yeah.
imagine being able to treat just the issue instead of like at general treat everything,
Well, it's like the preventative, it's the proactive action, instead of like waiting until you have a massive leak. If you could see it at an earlier stage, then like think of what you're preventing over time. It would be really exciting.
Well, that's amazing. I don't want to keep you over time. I know that you are incredibly
Yeah.
busy. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate being able to have you on and talk a little bit about this further, and hope we can do it again.
Yeah, Taylor, it was a great pleasure. It was fun learning more about your history with ARSMD as well. Huge shout out to Scott and Chandra. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure. My name is Taylor. I am the marketing strategist at Gravidia and the host of Leadership Line of Sight. We have had Adam Brown today. Adam is the strategic initiatives lead at Wyvern, an incredible space imaging company that can help you see the whole rainbow. Thank you so much for coming in, and we'll catch you next time on Leadership Line of Sight.